Our next speaker is Dr. Doman. Dr. Doman is currently an affiliated faculty in the Student Affairs and Higher Education at Missouri State. He serves as Emeritus Vice President for Student Affairs at Missouri State University. He graduated with a PhD in Counseling Students Personnel from Kansas State University in 1976. In 1973, he earned his master's from Kansas State University, and Dr. Doman earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in 1968 from Emporia State University.
Probably one of the most powerful things an ethical leader can do is to, by their actions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you take a leadership role in that. Now, you definitely can be a leader and not be ethical. I think history is full of a lot of leaders who, as you examine what they accomplished or didn't accomplish, I think a lot of people would say they probably didn't do the right thing, i.e. ethical behavior. Right? I'd like to start this one with a story. Okay? It's a story about it's either a 7 or 8 year old boy. Okay? He had a lot of boyhood friends. There was a kind of a group of 7 of the 7, 8 year olds in the neighborhood that always played together and interacted together. And one of the boys, had a birthday. And like I think probably most of you, when you're growing up, when friends have a birthday, you have a birthday party, get together. Well, this little boy, 7, 8 year old, was sick. He couldn't go to the birthday party. Right? So he missed that. And a few days passed by, and he was interacting with his friends. Well, he found out at this birthday party, one of the party favors that everybody received was these Super Balls. You bounce, and they bounce clear up to the ceiling. And these guys always got together. There's 7 or 8 of them. They'd always get together and play. Well, he went and joined his friends, and they were all playing with their Super Balls, but he didn't have one to play with. And he made the comment that I think most young people would say, "Boy, I want one, I want one." And one of his friends said, "Well, they've got them right down here at the store. There's a neighborhood market, okay? And in that neighborhood market, they had the little, like gumball machines you'd put money in, and they had these little plastic bubbles with little things in it. Well, there was a Super Ball in this one. It was all dedicated to Super Balls, all different colors and all that. And it cost a nickel. I might give you an idea of how long ago this was, because it only cost a nickel for this, right? Well, he went to the store, dug in his pocket, and he only had a couple pennies, okay? But he thought to himself, well, maybe it'll still work. So he put the penny in the machine, turned the handle, and it got stuck. It didn't do anything. And he was just working and working. And lo and behold, the proprietor of the store came by and said, "Well, what's the matter?" And the boy said, "I'm trying to get a Super Ball." Oh, the proprietor took out his key, unlocked the top of that dispenser, reached in, gave him one, and locked up, didn't say a thing, and walked away. Well, the little boy realized he'd put a penny in there because he wasn't sure whether it would work or not, and he was just given this Super Ball. Right? He didn't say anything and walks out the store and starts playing with his friends with his Super Ball. Right? That little boy was me. Right? Now, was that theft? I probably wouldn't get arrested for cheating on 4 cents, maybe. I don't know. Was it right? Right? Did that little boy, me, did I say anything to anyone? No, I didn't. Okay. When my mother saw me playing with the Super Ball, she said, "Great, where'd you get the Super Ball?" And I made the comment, "Well, they were selling them down at the store in the corner." She said, "Okay." Didn't say a thing. Okay. To this day, I still feel guilty about that. Right? Have any of you ever done anything like that when you're kids? Okay. Anybody? You got a story that they could share? All right. When does ethical behavior start? When do you learn from experiences? When do you get feedback? Let me tell you another story. Happened right here on this campus. Now, I was not involved in it, but an individual that was involved shared this with me. It was just a few years ago. A bunch of guys, spring break time comes, okay? How many of you gone on spring break trips or would like to go on spring break trips? Right? Okay, all right. Yeah. This group decided they were going to go to a friend's cabin close to Padre Island. Okay? And so they all pooled their money. They were going to have to take 2 vehicles and all this. And one young man says, well, where is this, place? Well, they've got the directions on the highway and all this. And this was when they said, well, let's get a GPS, so we can do that. Well, one young man says, tell you what, I'll go to Walmart, we'll get this GPS, okay, and that'll get us there, and when we come back, I'll just turn it back into Walmart. They got a 30-day, no question asked guarantee, okay. Well, the young man that was sharing this with me said he wasn't feeling real comfortable about that. I mean, that's not right. It's not illegal, is it? Because it's a 30-day money-back guarantee. You can return it. No questions asked. That was the policy. So it must be okay. But is that the intent of that policy? This young man said they were taking 2 cars. So he decided he would ride in the car that didn't have the GPS because he felt uncomfortable about that. And he said, so I felt like I was doing the right thing. Did he exercise any leadership in that? I asked him, did he share that concern with any of his friends? And no, he didn't. Right? So he thought about it, he thought about actions, active decision making. That's probably one of the keys, I think, to making ethical decisions. There are things that are spur of the moment, okay? Competing needs or values or wants. That little boy, he wanted that Super Bowl, right? Didn't actively think about whether he's doing right or wrong. Just, well, would this penny work? Okay? But then when it was provided, didn't say anything because he wanted that Super Bowl. Right? So his actions probably, in a way, would say maybe not the right thing to do, i.e., does that mean not ethical? Okay? All right. A little older, this young man that was telling me about this experience of the GPS, returning it, he felt like, no, that's not right, but he didn't want to say anything. As we talked about that more, why? He says, well, it's so hard to bring it up. They're my friends. It's peers, That was my words, not his. Okay? Probably one of the biggest challenges when you try to make decisions. Right? There are ethical dilemmas that come about, some more crucial than others. Right out of undergraduate school, I taught at school and coached for 1 year in Rolla, Missouri. Anybody from Rolla, that area? Okay, all right. Then I received one of those letters that young men don't receive anymore. It was one of those greetings letters from Uncle Sam, you are to report. Okay? This was during the Vietnam War, all that. Well, I decided if I was going to go in the military, even though I was drafted, I'd just soon go as an officer, and I found out I could. I went down and enlisted, went to officers candidate school. Some of the best leadership training I've ever experienced was when I was in the military. Excellent leadership. And I recall one meeting, and let me do a quick, I never served in combat, thank goodness. The best thing that happened to me was the GI Bill that helped on graduate work. Okay? But I remember one of the classes that we had in officers candidate school. It was led by a chaplain. Okay? And he asked us, how many of you are of the Christian faith? And a lot of us raised our hand. All right? So 10 Commandments. Let's talk about the 10 Commandments. And we went through the 10 Commandments. And he said for the last one, thou shalt not kill. Okay? And here we're being trained to be, being trained for an infantry leader. Okay? At that point in our officers candidate school, we were senior cadets. I already had warning orders for Fort Lewis, Washington, which was the staging area to go to Vietnam. Okay? It was going to be in a combat situation. Like I said, crossed my heart or whatever, I was lucky I didn't have to serve, okay? in that kind of role. But we had a discussion about thou shalt not kill, except. How many of you think it's appropriate to kill ISIS leadership? The atrocities that they do. Right? How many of us feel that maybe that term of collateral damage, when you're trying to get somebody who is evil, but other innocent citizens maybe are killed because of that? Those are pretty tough issues. We talked through that as far as how we respond. Now, it was interesting the time frame that this discussion went on as far as in context of history, because this was in 1970. We were, the Vietnam War was winding down. There were protests, on and on, sort of thing. So it was a real lively discussion. But again, it was talking about personal decision making and how you need to justify things in your mind based upon certain criteria. Okay? So we spent a lot of time doing that. Right? Have any of you been involved in an ethical decision where there is not necessarily a clear right or wrong, but there's advantages and disadvantages? I've got another story I want to tell in a minute, but has anybody got an example that they want to share? Right? That's been a tough decision? Right? And it might be getting a Super Bowl out of a store or not? Okay. All right. Well, let me share another story. This is a true one that I was involved with. It was at another university. Okay. This university, I went there as the vice president for student services, a similar position that I had here. Okay. It was the second year of the presidency of the individual that's president. Okay. And one of the things that we did a strategic planning process for the entire university. There were many different components of the strategic planning process. One area dealt with facilities. The campus that I was working on, a lot of the facilities were pretty downtrodden, and there was a lot of need, to build things. An individual once told me on a college campus, if you don't have construction going on all the time, you're falling behind. Well, this campus hadn't had any construction for several years. There were a lot of things that were falling behind. So one component of that strategic planning was on facilities. And the student leadership was brought into this, part of it, and everybody came to consensus that one of the first needs that we needed on this campus was a new library. I mean, the library didn't have any of the technology that we have nowadays at all. The stacks were, the building had been retrofitted where I couldn't walk through a couple of the hallways because I was too tall. I had to duck down where they had the stacks and rows of it. So again, it was a broad consensus among students and faculty and staff and community members and alums that the first priority in a new building needs to be the library. Okay? So a lot of discussion about how there was private fundraising. The development office was working on possibilities of grants and everything, working with student leaders and all that. A decision that we would go for a student fee. I honestly don't remember what the student fee was. It was something like $50, okay, a semester, and that was to pay the bonds for a new building. Okay? Well, that was passed by the board, okay, and the fees were to be collected for the beginning of the fall semester. So as people were registering in the spring semester, very much kind of like we do it here, Missouri State, people would register, they're paying their fees, all this, and there was that, let's say, $50 additional fee for it. It was on paper designed as an infrastructure fee, but everyone knew, again, first priority and what we're building for is to build that library. That's what the funds are going to be dedicated for. All right. Now, as an interesting part of this is there was a lot of other work going on. How do we finance different things? And a possibility for a grant came available. It was really unusual, something I've never been involved with, but there was a granting authority that agreed that they would finance this new library. All right? But the real codicil with it, it had to remain totally confidential until they announced it. Right? Okay, that sounded fine. But then we found out they wouldn't announce it until the middle of the summer. Okay? Well, the president pulled the administrative team together, and we talked about this. It was in April. People were pre-registering for the next semester. we were collecting fees, this fee that had been passed with pretty broad support. But we couldn't say anything. In fact, we found examples, and this agency provided examples of where they had pulled funding when it was, their funding was let out before they announced it. So we knew from history of what we found out that they were serious about this. So we had to be totally closed-lipped about this. What would we do? All right? So the administrative team, we were talking, and first there was just great excitement, there really was, about, whoa, this is wonderful, this is going to be taken, we won't have to go in the debt to the level that we thought we'd have to get this needed library, okay? And then the CFO brought up, we're collecting this money, what do we use it for? Do we make a super duper library? Do we expand the plans that we've shown to everybody? Or what do we do? Well, discussion, and I admit I was a part of this discussion too. Somebody brought up, that we've got a lot of infrastructure needs on this campus. This is an infrastructure fee. Why don't we go ahead and move the science? But we've got to build science labs. That's a need. That's something to keep updated. We've got to do this. The discussion went on and on and on. Leadership. The president of that university finally said, after hearing and discussing, and said, we need to give that money back to the students. We sold this from the standpoint of money was going to be used for the library. Okay? The CFO says, ooh, that's great. How do we get it back to everyone? There's some that undoubtedly won't show up. You can imagine the logistics behind something like that done. That president said, the right thing to do is we've got to stick to our word. Let's give the money back. Now, the way it was structured, the students who came back, they took that money off of the next year's tuition or the next semester's tuition if they were going to remain. But if they weren't coming back, a check was cut for them. I've talked to the CFO many times, Matt, and he talked about the unbelievable complications that came about that, the individual differences occur. Okay. That act very much, though, in demonstrating that leadership, probably did more to garner the support of the faculty and definitely the students than anything that was done. Okay? So doing the right thing, do you silently do the right thing? Again, probably one of the most important things in leadership is actions, modeling that very definitely. Okay? But sometimes that's not enough. Okay? Sometimes you need to step forward. The young man that talked about, his friend that went to get the GPS and he was going to turn it back. Does he say something? Should he say something? Those are difficult things. Talk about interpersonal communication. We're talking about communication, Earle was. Right? So it's really easy to say to do the right thing. Many times, though, you've got to recognize that it is a challenge. So how do you determine what to do? Active decision making, the discussion, the interactions with your friends and all that. Talk it through. Okay? Many things are pretty self-evident about this is the right thing to do and it's not. Most of it, hopefully, it won't be decisions like life and death, you're in the military or something. Okay? But most things, if you discuss and talk about what's right, what's wrong, hopefully you'll come to the right decision. But the important thing is active decision making, knowing why you're doing what you're doing. Right? There's always differences of opinion. Okay? Sometimes leaders have to, not only justify, but explain why they're doing it, and not necessarily everybody will agree with that. But you should feel firm on the decision that you do make. Right? Has anybody been involved in an ethical dilemma that they'd like to share? Anybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. Active decision making, do the right thing, but also don't be afraid to step up and exercise leadership. Okay? Thank you.